Hi, thank you for joining us this evening as we're going to have our masterclass on conflict resolution. I am just so excited about sharing this simple concept with you. Many times, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Carla, and I call myself a relationship doula. And the reason that I love the phrase doula. Years ago, when I was having my children, I remember seeing this article I was living in upstate New York, and they talked about doulas. And I'm like, oh my, this sounds so wonderful to have someone come alongside you during childbirth, during pregnancy to kind of educate you and just to give you support, guidance through what can be a very uncomfortable, maybe even there's going to be some pain, there's discomfort in giving birth and pregnancy, and so many unknowns. And I was talking with a friend of mine, and she said, well, you are a doula. And I'm like, yes, I'm a relationship doula, because that's what I do. I come alongside people and help them to go through different stages of birthing relationships, rebirthing relationships with themselves, rebirthing relationships with family members, with coworkers, even with their spiritual being. Sometimes you just have to have that rebirth and reconnection. And so that's come, I call myself a relationship doula, just helping people to process that. Now, something else about me, just to let you know why I'm so interested in teaching people how to resolve conflict, is that my area of specialty is stress management and relationships. And many times I realize that the cause of stress for so many people is the conflict. There's a conflict that's the source of it. Conflict with themselves, conflict with children, with your spouse or partner, with workers, or even with strangers. And so there's conflict. And so throughout the years, I just have observed that. I remember as a child being a wallflower, and I didn't mind being one just to see and observe people. And many times I saw when the disconnect began, where the other person may have been responding to something that wasn't asked, and the other person didn't hear that. And now there was a misunderstanding, and there's people are offended. And I would sit there and think, they didn't realize there was a disconnect. A shift just occurred, but they weren't aware of that. And that's where I come in. I want to teach people how to make the connection. And I believe if you're given tools that you will be able to navigate the situation. We go to school, we learn our ABCs and we learn our one, two, threes, but no one really ever teaches us. I don't know about you, but teaches you how to handle stress, how to handle conflict. And so these three simple tools that I am going to share with you, I think are going to give you that light bulb moment. It's like, aha, I get it. I get it. This is what I need to help me identify what is causing the conflict. Because the first step in making progress is if you're able to identify it, then there's something you can do about it. But we'll save that for another discussion about what to do about it. So you should have received a guide so that you can follow along as I share this simple framework about how to identify conflict. And you're going to say, oh my, it's that simple? Yes, it is. And so I look forward to you having those aha moments. For me, I grew up, there were five siblings, and my mom was an educator, so we always had children around. So there was always source of conflict. And even as an adult, I've dealt with conflict with my siblings where we had decided we weren't going to have a relationship. We were just done because of how we were offended. But because we didn't know then the tools that I know now, because since then we have reestablished and grown our relationship, we were able now to come back and have a stronger, more in depth relationship because Conflict doesn't have to make you strangers. Conflict doesn't have to keep you estranged. Conflict can actually help you to have a stronger, more authentic, real relationship with someone. And so let's jump right into it as I share with you my framework for my masterclass. So here we are. This is our masterclass on conflict resolution. How to identify. My ARK framework is going to show you how to identify and process and resolve conflict. And in this setting, we're just going to talk about identifying, but there's another step about how to process and resolve that conflict. But the key, the first step is learning how to identify it. And so the ARK framework will help you make more conscientious and mindful decisions in your interaction with family, friends, employees, even strangers. Now, you see there's usually a cycle of conflict. There's a problem, and sometimes we may or may not identify what it is. And the goal is to resolve it, but sometimes we don't resolve it. And so it just spins around more and more and become more insidious and just buried there because we have not dealt with the issue at hand. Many of us like to just ignore something and think, well, oh, if I don't pay attention to it, it's going to go away. No, conflict doesn't work like that. It's just a volcano waiting to erupt, a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Whatever analogy you need, that's what happens when we don't resolve conflict. So just because you didn't deal with it doesn't mean it's gone away. So, are you a good fit for this class? So, this class is right for you if you have stopped speaking with someone and you want to reestablish that relationship. It could be with a family member, it could be with a coworker. But if you've stopped speaking with someone and you want to reestablish a relationship, I'm glad you're here and listening to this class. This is a good fit for you. This class is great for you if stressful relationships are affecting your health. So often, stress is a factor in the quality of our health. Sometimes it can lead to hypertension, it can lead to other cardiovascular issues, and we just don't realize how much stress can affect our health. So if you are being stressed in a relationship and is affecting your health, I'm so glad you're here because these tools will definitely help you reclaim your power and hopefully alleviate some of the stress that is affecting your health. Another person, this is right for you if you're a manager or small business owner and you have to interact with employees and customers. Sometimes customer service is so important, and keeping and motivating employees is necessary as a small business owner. So you need to be able to have that wisdom and insight to be able to identify what the problem is, the conflict, so that you can address it effectively. Now, this class is right for you as well. If you are clueless and you don't know how you've offended the person in your life that you love, and they have stopped or either minimized their interaction with you. Because have you seen that before? You and your friend were best buds, used to call all the time, and all of a sudden they're distant, and you have no clue what happened. This class is right for you because you may have that aha moment and realize, oh my, I offended them. And many of us don't know how to interact with someone once we've been offended. We, like I said, some of us tend to retreat into silence. And this masterclass is right for you if you're angry and hurt by the way you've been treated and you want peace. I'm a big proponent of peace. One of my taglines is that I help women bravely birth peace in the pieces of their lives. Learning to live unoffended is such a great stress reliever. It just gives you a lightness of life, a joy that people are just so annoyed. It's like, well, how can she really be that excited about life and in her own little bubble? It's not that we're in our own little bubble, but we have reclaimed our voice, our power. Because when you have conflict, many times you've given your power to someone else. So we're going to learn what to do. And now, this master class is not for you if you're not ready to change your mindset. If you're not open to learning, um, this class isn't going to be for you. It's not going to be for you if you're expecting the other person to change. So often, when there's a conflict, we want the other person to be the first person to make the move, or they need to change. They offended me. And so you're giving someone else that power. And I want to teach you how to use these tools to take back your power so that you don't have to wait on someone else to live unoffended, to live joyfully, to live at peace. And this class is not for you if you've given up and you believe there's no hope. Now, if you're still here, then it means that you may have a little glimmer of hope. And that's all I need for you to just listen in and see whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you. So, here's what I promise you. My promise to you is that you'll walk away knowing how to identify why you are offended. I also promise you that you'll learn to receive. You learn to resolve the inner struggle on what to do when you feel offended. And my promise to you is that everything I share with you can help you find peace and release stress. So, in return, what I'm going to ask from you, in return, I ask that you keep an open mind, show up for yourself and your sanity, and trust the process. All right. It's not going to work overnight. And sometimes it's just like, but I want you to give it a try. Give it a try for your sake, for your sanity's sake. Many of us are stressed and we're losing our mind. And we're one decision sometimes from the nut house, from doing something that is dangerous. And so, for your sanity's sake, I want you to show up for your sanity's sake, and keep an open mind. Now, what are some of the mistakes we do and spend time worrying about when it deals to conflict? Some of the things we spend uh, hours worrying about. Some of us can't go to sleep at night, insomnia, because we're just so worried about our children. Are they safe? They're out doing this. They're being disrespectful. Their teacher's picking with them at school. Their parent, you're a single parent, and the other parent isn't doing their part. At work, it could be that they don't have enough people to do the workload and it falls on you. Or it could be that the finances there that you spend time worrying about, you don't have enough money to cover the bills. Someone stole something from you, so you're short on finances. So you spend hours worrying about that. You spend hours worrying about your health. Your health could be diminishing. You may be in treatment for an illness. You could be caring for somebody else whose health has been affected. And then there's your family. You could be worried about your relationship with your partner. It could be going downhill. There could be some infidelity occurring, or you're worried about, will he propose? Will he or she propose? Whatever that is. And then your friends, being able to balance your life and give time to them because they want you to do this, but you don't have any time to give them right now. You may be working on something. And so the stress and the different conflicts that could occur in any of these categories affect you. So now, another mistake that we do when trying to resolve conflict, and I mentioned it before, is waiting for the other person to change. And that is a mistake, believe it or not. It's a mistake waiting for somebody else to change. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The third mistake that we do in trying to resolve conflict is that we give the power to change the course of your life to someone else. Yeah, you heard me. That's the mistake you do when you're trying to resolve conflict. You're giving someone else the power to change the course of your life. Yes, you are. And you're going to see what I mean by the end of this class. So here are my three keys to unlock the source of conflict. Now, before I show you that, my ARK, how many of you are familiar with the story in the Bible that talks about Noah built an ark because a flood was coming? And they'd never had rain before, so they didn't know what he was doing building this ark. But they needed that ark to live through that flood that was coming. And so, my take on a modern day ark is the acronym that I've created for resolving conflict, because if you don't apply ARK, guys, you're going to drown. I remember mentioning it to a group that I was sharing this concept to, and she's like, "Well, I don't want to do that." And I said, "That's fine. That's your choice." Just like with Noah, people had a choice to get on the ark. And I can't force anyone. But if you want to empower yourself and save your life, save your sanity, I it would behoove you to apply art. And so this is what we're going to do. I just think we need ARC in order to identify what the issues are. And the other thing I thought about too, Michelle Obama says when they go high, when they go low, we go high. And I'm saying sometimes we have to go more than high. We have to build an arc so that we can stay afloat, because the flood is coming. The foolishness is coming. And so going high is just not sufficient. Is now having that arc to help you stay afloat. So we're going to dive right in to the three things that make up arc. Arc is as simple as acknowledged, right slash respected. We're going to use those two words interchangeably. And no. Yes, you may be scratching your head, is like, I don't know how those three things are going to be the keys for me to unlock the source of conflict. But you're going to see these keys can be life saving and keep you afloat during a storm. I grew up in the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, and I remember when I had to learn how to float. It was so frightening, because it's like, really? You just want me to just stretch out, lay down, and trust that the water is going to keep me afloat? Seemed like such a foreign concept. But now I do. And when I go swimming in the ocean, when I get tired, I just flip over on my back and I float until I catch myself. And so hopefully, ARC will work like that for you. It will give you a place of refuge so that you can flip over and float a while and process conflict as it comes to you. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do some definitions. So my key one is the need to be acknowledged. And so let's define that. Acknowledge means to recognize the status of, express gratitude or expression of. So now this is a source of contention for many. They were not acknowledged. So I want you to pause for a moment. You can even pause this replay and just think of a time when you were offended because you weren't acknowledged. Just pause, just think. They have a silent moment, because I'm going to share different scenarios so you can see what I mean when I talk about the need to be acknowledged and why that is a source of conflict for many. All right, are you excited? I'm excited about what it is. So here's some scenarios that we're going to talk about. And you can jot down different scenarios that you have encountered, or that you have experienced. So here's a classic one. You work on a presentation, and your boss took all the credit. He didn't acknowledge your contribution at all. You stayed up working late hours to do this. And he actually got up there and took all the credit, didn't mention your name, didn't say, Sue helped me with this project, or put in there your work paper, a paper that you worked on, you did the research. They gave you no credit. They didn't acknowledge your contribution at all. Aren't you upset? Yeah, I know you are. Here's another one that happens. The pastor's up on the pulpit and he names people Tom, Dick, Mary, Ellen, all these people he thanked for working on the building committee. And you were the one that spearheaded the project, and he failed to acknowledge you. And you're sitting there in the pew thinking, oh my, what about me? He didn't acknowledge you. And you are quite upset about that, aren't you? You don't have to admit it, but I know I've seen it. I've sat many a times in churches and look around in the pews and just look at the congregation, and I could see people's spirit and whole demeanor just shrivel up or get angry or just get puffed up. It's just like, wait a minute, he didn't call my name. So again, could you see how learning that the key to a conflict being acknowledged or not acknowledged is very important in trying to resolve a conflict? Yep. Let's think about our third scenario. You're attending a function with your spouse or your partner, and he's been working tirelessly to try to get this promotion, this certificate, and so he needed to finish a degree and do some other things. So you've been at home double loading, watching the children, watching his mom, or you've been at home typing up reports and everything for him to make sure that he can successfully complete this. So now you're at that business function and you're just so proud of your spouse, so proud of your partner. And then he gets up and he's going to start thanking people. And you know where I'm going with it, right? That's right. He thanked his parents, he thanked his coworker, can even thank the dog. But what happened? He failed to acknowledge your support. Yeah. So now I've given you time to think about a scenario where when you weren't acknowledged, you now were offended and it could lead to conflict. So take that time. I hope you've written it down to see that. Because keep in mind the keys and the tools that I'm sharing you is helping you to learn why you get offended. But then the flip side is as you become better with utilizing the concept, you're able to recognize when someone else is offended because they weren't acknowledged. That's wisdom. That's insight. That's power. When you're able to recognize it in someone else, so that if you're talking to them, they say, oh my, I see why they're offended. I didn't acknowledge them. And so then there's different steps that you can take once you're aware of that. So it's twofold. You're able to identify why you're offended because you weren't acknowledged. And then with practice, you're able to identify when somebody else is offended because they weren't acknowledged. And there's another step, different things to do when that happens. But right, this class is just about identifying those things. So now, an automatic response. Do you know what an automatic response is for when you're not acknowledged? Do you know what emotion you normally feel when you're not acknowledged? That emotion normally is anger. Yeah, it just so happened as an A as well too. I didn't plan it that way. But it normally happens when you're not acknowledged that you feel some anger. So think about that. Share, write down what emotions you feel when you're not acknowledged, because that's the place where we're going to begin, that you can begin to begin processing that information. But that is normally the automatic response that one feels when they're not acknowledged. They feel some anger. Now, our next step is the next key to identifying that we're going to cover today, because you can use this to identify, resolve, and process conflict. But to identify conflict is when you have the need to be right and the need to be respected. I think I hear that often. Oh, they don't respect me. They disrespected me. I was right. They was wrong. They were wrong. Those two words I'm going to use interchangeably. So let's define what right is. So right can be defined as conforming to facts or truth, be correct. Our definition of respect, an act of giving particular attention or consideration to. That is the definition and the framework that we're going to be using with our second key to identifying conflict, the need to be right. And this, again, I want you to think about a particular time, because I'm going to go through some scenarios, but I want you to reflect back to a time when you were offended about something and realize it was because you didn't feel respected, and you were right, and you were offended because they were wrong and they stood their ground in their wrongness. Because again, this is how you felt, and that's what we're talking about. So let's explore some scenarios. Here's some scenarios. You didn't want a pet because you knew the responsibility will fall on you. You're working full time, you're caring for an ill parent, you're taking courses to get your degree, but you were reassured by your parent or by the partner, your spouse, or your children that no, I'm going to take care of it. You don't have to worry about it. We can get this pet. And so you give in. Okay, fine. 3 months later, what happens? You come home, the pet has peed in the house for the thousandth time, and no one else is home but you. So you have to clean up the mess. You have to walk and feed the pet in 15 minutes because you have to dash out the door to care for your parent. And you're sitting there thinking, I was right. I knew this was going to happen. This was going to fall on me. They don't respect me. They're taking advantage of me. Does that resonate with someone? Yes, it does. All right, let's look at our second scenario. It's a close game. The score is tied. The referee called a foul, and you didn't even touch the guy. The referee is wrong. You're right, and your team lost. Oh my goodness. This is classic. It's just like, you were right. It's like, how could that person do it? Put in whatever other sport that you may play or other game. I know my family, we do lots of boards games. And so sometimes someone's like, they were right. And it could just ruin the whole atmosphere when someone gets so uptight because they felt they were right. And the others didn't agree with them that they were right. Classic husband and spouse kind of thing. I'm right, you're wrong. And so, therefore, source of conflict. See my ARK framework? And let's look at our third scenario. There's a process in place at work. So there's a flow chart to let you know the chain of command that things are supposed to do. And you are the person that you should be contacted first. But you have someone in your office, and we each have a person like that who think too highly of themselves. And so what do? They go over your head. Each time they go over your head, and they don't follow procedures, the correct procedures, and no one checks her. And you are fuming because you said, that's not right. She doesn't respect me. And so, therefore, you may start having some conflict at work because this person is not respecting you. They're not respecting the process. And that's not right. Some of us get highly indignant because that's not right. They shouldn't be doing that. Now, we're not talking about, I know some of you may say, oh, we're not talking about legal things or social justice things, things that we know aren't right. We're talking about interpersonal relationships right now, okay? This ARK, we can't solve this for the whole world in that. This ARK framework specifically is for you and your interpersonal relationships. So there we have that. I just wanted to clarify it. Now, you've had some time to think about a scenario where you felt that you were right And have you written it down and thought about it? Have you thought about it? Okay, great. Now, do you know what the automatic response is when you're not validated because you are right or respected? Do you know what the automatic response is or feeling that you feel? I'm going to tell you. It just so happens to be R as well too, and that was just by resentfulness. Normally, when you feel that you are right and you've been disrespected, they haven't respected you, you end up feeling resentfulness. And that resentfulness can make your blood just start to boil. It just sits there in your spirit, and you start fuming silently. Sometimes you may explode, but sometimes people do it silently. But resentfulness is normally the emotion, the emotion that you feel when you feel as though you haven't been validated because you were respected and you were right. So keep that in mind. Can you tell me what emotions, or write down what emotions you feel when you are not validated, when you're right, or that you aren't respected? And keep in mind how we're doing this. You're learning to identify it if that's why you're feeling offended. And keep in mind, you're going to be able to learn it to look at others and realize that's why they feel offended. So again, getting these tools and learning to implement them. Great. So now our third key for ARK is the need to know. Yes, yes, yes. This one is is so interesting for me. So let's define know. Know means to be aware of the truth or factually of and or given information. And so, oops, they that bullet does belong there, so disregard that one. But that is what normally happens when we feel the need to know. Many times we feel entitled to know. If we knew, we would have acted or responded differently, because this one is tricky. Oftentimes, we tell ourselves a story that we think we know or assume and respond accordingly. And you're going to see what I mean when we go through the different scenarios. Our need to know can be so detrimental. And as I said, we create a story in our head that may not be true, but we respond and act accordingly. And keep in mind, we're talking about resolving, identifying conflict because of what we think we know, when in fact it may not be that way. So let's look at these different scenarios. So, scenario number one, this could be a classic one. Your spouse or partner didn't call to tell you he's bringing company home for dinner, and you're just like, "Oh my goodness." He comes to the door and is like, "Oh yeah, I brought such and such home." Or even if it wasn't, he brought his homeboys or whatever, no notice. So you may or may not have food available, but the point is, you felt you should know. He should have called you. He should have informed you about or given you that information. Keep in mind what no means, giving you that information, which he didn't. Here's another scenario. You may have lost your job, but you didn't tell your parents that you lost your job. So you just ask them for a loan. So they don't know you've lost a job, and they tell you no. And you could be offended, but again, they didn't know. They may think, well, oh no, he's working. Why is he asking us for money? But if they knew, they may have had a different response. Do you see the connection? And the same one with the first scenario. If the spouse knew, she could have been prepared, or she could have told him, you know what, you need to pick up some extra food on the way home because I don't have anything. So again, they were offended because they felt they should know. And this scenario, one that happens on the job many times, is your manager told you to apply for this promotion. So you're thinking, oh, okay, good, I'm going to do this. But what you didn't know is that she told her friend to apply as well. And guess who got the promotion? And in your mind, you're like, well, if I knew she was going to do that, why apply? Or you're offended because she knew she was going to do that and she wasted your time. So can you see how K is so important and how knowing um, can cause, or not knowing in this instance, can cause you to be offended? One of the stories I like to share and tell is about the story I heard about a man on a train with his son. Train is crowded, but the young boy couldn't be more than 4 or 5, is just acting and crying and just misbehaving out of control. And the father is just there, kind of just looking comatose, just there, not doing anything to control this child and his behavior. And what's the normal response that we will do? If you're honest with yourself, many of us is like, well, if that was my child, I would do X, Y, and Z. You fill in the blank for whatever you wanted to fill in the blank. But here's what I want you to keep in mind when I say, if you knew the story, or knowing that we don't always need to know things. But say, for instance, you knew that that man had just left the hospital and his wife had passed away. And so, therefore, he's in shock and disbelief. This young boy, 4 or 5 years old, has lost his mom and is aware of that. And so he's acting out. What would your response be because of that information? It would be completely different. And one of the things that I like to teach in my sessions is helping people that you may not know something, but you can be gracious and change the story that you're telling yourself in your head about somebody to minimize conflict. You can do that. Because again, we're talking about taking back the power of you controlling your situations. So, have you guys written down your own scenario where there was a conflict because you didn't know? Or you're now realizing that you had a conflict with a friend and they're offended because they didn't know, you didn't tell them something? You see, are you connecting the dots? I'm so excited that you're doing that, because one of the emotions, or an automatic response or emotion that you feel when you don't know something, is betrayal. Say, for instance, your good friend threw a party and didn't tell you. You didn't know she was having a party, she didn't invite you. You feel betrayal. Yes. What emotions do you feel when you find out that you were left out of the loop, that you didn't know something? I've talked with many clients who the project went on and they were left out of the loop, so they didn't know what was happening next in the project. You know, they should have known, but they didn't know. And so things fell apart. So that sense of betrayal is what you feel sometimes when you don't know something and you should have known. Certain times there are things that you should know to do, because one of the things I enjoy teaching, and it's not going to be in this class, is then how to process that conflict. And believe it or not, there's another ARK for that. So staying afloat with ARK, being identify conflict and process it and resolve it, so that you can learn to live an unoffended life, so that you can learn to handle conflict with confidence and with some dignity and clarity. You're regaining your voice, you're regaining the power. Remember, I said earlier that one of the mistakes we do is waiting for someone else to make the first move or say they're sorry. I watched this silly show on TLC called 90 Day Fiancé the Other Way. And so there's this one couple, she's 50 something, he's 30 something, I believe, and he lives in a Middle Eastern country. And so the lady from the US has a son who is an adult, and he's not crazy about this, but he flies there for the wedding. And he gets there late at night, and the groom to be asked him, "Oh, you want to meet my family?" And the young man, Liam, says, "No, I don't want to. I'm tired." And so when they did a cutaway and had the groom speaking. He was like, well, oh, if he's going to be disrespectful, rude to my family, I'm going to be rude to him. And I'm just like, how infantile that is. But isn't that how we deal with conflict? We allow what the other person's response is or lack of response dictate how we're going to behave. That all of a sudden they're behaving immaturely. You decide you're going to behave immaturely. Does that make any sense? It's just like, okay, he's throwing mud, I'm going to throw mud. We've we have lost a sense of clarity and keeping our power. Here's another example. Would you ever give someone, a thief, the keys to come into your house? No, you wouldn't. It doesn't make sense, does it? But that is what we do when we give somebody else the power for how we interact and handle conflict. You've given them the key to come into your house, into your brain, into your life. I want you to take the key away. If you ever want to work with me, I would love to have you just message me. I'm on Facebook at Coach Carla Henry Lewis. That's at Coach Carla, HenryLewis, Carla with a C. Because again, I take you through the steps of ARK and how to resolve that conflict so that you can regain your power and you can now take that key away or change the lock so that they don't come into your space anymore and wreak havoc because you do have the power of your responses and how you process conflict. So we're going to be winding down in a few minutes, but listen, please let me know what you thought about this webinar. So now the U.S. Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unfortunately, we have added on 3 additional rights slash needs. We feel that we need to be acknowledged, we feel we have a need to be right or respected, and we feel we have the need to know. And if you're interested, I'm going to be doing a course, a 4-week course, and I'm going to put that up here. This course is going to be held on Thursdays, beginning next Thursday. And we're going to have 4 courses. You're going to have access to a Facebook group. You're going to actually have a 30-minute session with me. And we're going to learn the next phase of ARK in processing conflict. It's a great investment, just $247, traditional value of $547. But if you want to learn to live unoffended and learn to live intentionally in life, I would love for you to join me in this course of Choose Joy. Choose joy. Choose joy in processing and resolving conflict. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune into the webinar. Feel free to follow me on Instagram or on Facebook at Coach Carla, CarlaHenrylewis.